Hey there, welcome to Charting Toward Intimacy, where we're expanding the natural family planning conversation. I'm your host, Ellen Holloway. All right, today we are talking about why you need an instructor. Why can't you just read a book to learn natural family planning? And first off, as a person who, quote, learned from a book first and then became an instructor, this is so important to me. There are quite a few books and like PDF documents on the internet that claim to be able to teach you fertility awareness and NFP from just reading. But there are a few things that they miss that I really want to point out. First, while yes, the basic science and basic rules of a method are fairly simple, that is for a textbook cycle. And what I mean by a textbook cycle is a cycle with, for example, a perfect mucus pattern and an easily defined temperature rise. Of course, depending on the method used and the science they track, a textbook cycle would look different. But here's the thing, is real cycles happen in real life. Observations get missed some days. Stress affects your cycle length and it affects your signs that you're charting. Your cycle is not going to be a textbook cycle every time. And it might not ever look like a textbook cycle. Instructors go through months of training. They look at hundreds, even thousands of sample and real life charts. They spend tons of time learning alternate rules, ways to, for example, define confusing mucus. And overall, they're learning how to interpret real charts from real life. Your book that you read might give you a few alternate rules or maybe what a chart might look like with some sort of stress. But that's nothing compared with having a trained person backing you up and helping you confirm that you are interpreting your chart correctly. Instructors also go through something called a practicum. Every method has a practicum phase of some sort, even if it isn't called that. And what this is it's either a defined amount of time or a defined number of clients or cycles that an instructor needs to go through with oversight before they can teach on their own. So basically your instructor, even after they've spent months learning and practicing, needs to go through an instructor in training period. They can teach and they will interpret your charts, but they will also be overseen by an additional instructor. This could look like something like 6 clients with at least 6 charts for each client, or it could look like 9 months of practicum with a minimum of 10 clients. Or it could look like something completely different. I only know my method and its practicum requirements. Other methods have different requirements. After that practicum phase, your instructor might need to take an additional big, huge test with tons of example charts and different scenarios. So basically what I'm getting at here is an instructor is going to have so much more experience than your book could ever teach you. And questions. I want to talk about questions. So with a book, you can't ask questions. With an instructor, you can. It's as simple as that. If you don't understand something or something isn't clear, working with an instructor can alleviate that confusion. And this confusion is so common. For one example, most women were not taught about cervical mucus and how to interpret it and how it relates to fertility. You are learning something brand new. Questions are common, and getting your questions answered is key to full understanding and confidence in your method. And confidence is key to success in using a fertility awareness-based method. So let's look at an example story. So let's say Susie just learned the symptothermal method via a PDF she found online. First off, she sees that the PDF hasn't been updated since 2009, which of course brings up the question of, has anything changed? Is anything new or different? I don't actually know, which brings a little bit of hesitation towards confidence in the method. She reads in her PDF about how to read the mucus sign and how to chart her temperature. The mucus is really confusing to her because prior to reading this PDF, she didn't even know that cervical mucus was a thing. She also reads that she should chart for a while before having intercourse with her husband so she's comfortable with the method before sex can start confusing the mucus sign. All right, side note, pause on this story really quick. This is completely incorrect. And this is something you would work with your instructor to learn as you begin charting. Okay, back to the story. Since mucus is the sign she's most confused about, Susie and her husband decide they don't have sex for 2 full cycles. Discontent rises a little bit in the relationship, but mostly there's just no communication at all. After a while, Susie's husband asked if they might be able to have sex again soon. And Susie takes this as an affront that she's not figuring out this NFP thing fast enough and it's all her fault. When really her husband just wants to share in the good, natural, and encouraged marital intimacy that they should be sharing in. And so anyway, they begin to be intimate again, but very rarely. Susie extends the days beyond the rule fulfillment to be extra safe in case she did something wrong. Resentment builds about NFP because, first off, the document didn't teach them any of the theology behind it. So it just feels like a burdensome rule that they have to follow because they're good Catholics. Resentment also builds in Susie because she feels like she can't figure it out. Resentment builds in Susie's husband because there is a serious lack of communication and little to no intimacy each month. Sound familiar? As I have continued in this space and I've had more conversations with women and men about their experience with NFP, this story has become all too common. And I find myself in this story too when I began my NFP journey. Things like waiting to have sex until a few cycles so you're comfortable, lack of confidence in the rules, so extending the unavailable days, and just general resentment are so common when a method has been learned from a book. So let's look at the opposite example. We'll call her Michelle. Michelle and her fiance take a class a few months before they get married. They learn the method together and they ask questions freely in class and they really feel like they understand. Michelle begins charting, realizes that she doesn't really understand some of the mucus sign and asks about it at their next class. The instructor can clear up the confusion right away. Michelle might still feel a little wary about charting, but she knows that she has an instructor available. And so they really begin the journey together of practicing NFP. When Michelle and her fiance got married, maybe that particular cycle was totally wonky. So she and her now husband ended up needing to abstain for a while right after they got married because they're trying to avoid a pregnancy. Their instructor helped them to use an alternate rule for that cycle and helped them feel confident in determining the available days. On the unavailable days, they discussed how they both felt disappointed, but they also found other activities to do together as a newly married couple. Also, because the reality of abstinence was discussed in their class, they were both communicating and interpreting the chart together, and they understood what was going on. The theology behind NFP was also discussed in their class, and they understood the beauty of the fertility cycle in God's design. And while frustrating, they accepted it as part of the cross of their newly married life, and they tried to find ways to grow from their frustrations and difficulties. Quite a few months later, Michelle and her husband feel confident in charting, and they know that if they have a strange cycle or something's confusing, they know exactly where to turn, right back to their instructor. Okay, so that story isn't real. Or maybe, I hope it is. If that's your story, please let me know because I would love to hear that beautiful story. That's what I would have liked my story to look like. And in all honesty, that second half of the story is typically what my husband and I's NFP life looks like. The theology is a really key component to NFP, and that's something that's missing for the most part in books. Most fertility awareness-based methods who call themselves NFP, and again, NFP is fertility awareness plus discernment and prayer. So most of these methods that call themselves NFP, they will have a theological component to the instruction, some more than others. So without the theology, NFP makes no sense and it seems way too hard. The idea of abstaining is one of the hardest selling points of NFP. But when you understand that sex is an act created by God to be unitive and procreative, and that as married couples, we are called to be co-creators with God by uniting as spouses. Our marriages are meant to be life-giving, both in actual children and in the life that we bring to the world through our relationship and actions. And sex is the act through which that life-giving part of our marriage is lived out. We are giving our lives over to our spouse. We are giving our whole selves, and we are being open to life. Because we understand that sex is meant and designed to be both unitive and procreative, it makes perfect sense that blocking or removing one of those, for example, blocking the procreative part through using birth control or a condom or pulling out, destroys the act itself. Since we understand that sex is beautiful, we'd never want to mangle it away from its true purpose. So in this light, abstaining during the possibly fertile time when you're trying to avoid pregnancy makes perfect sense. And yeah, we miss it. Like I said before, sex is for unity and procreation. That unity part is awesome. That unity part is so good. And if we have discerned that now is not the right time to add another member to the family, then we need to put both parts on pause, the unitive aspect and the procreative aspect. And as hard as it is to give up a good thing, we understand why we need to do it. And we understand why we can't have one thing without the other. And while it is still difficult, especially if the abstinence is necessary for a long amount of time, we understand the why behind the need to abstain. And that makes it possible to even abstain in the first place. Just like we understand the why of needing to go to confession or the why of needing the Eucharist. And sometimes we don't feel like doing those things or we don't want to go do those things. But knowing why they are good for us and why we need them makes it possible for us to overcome the difficulty. So there you have it, 2 main reasons why you need an instructor. Confidence in the method is key to success with fertility awareness and NFP. And that confidence comes from working alongside a trained instructor who has experience with a wide range of cycle types and irregularities through their training. And then the other reason is understanding the theology is key to success in NFP. When the understanding of the cross of marriage and the 2 primary reasons sex exists, unity and procreation, are a part of your NFP journey, then it starts to make sense. And you and your husband are able to pick up that cross daily. Whether that cross is abstinence, infertility, unintended pregnancy, pregnancy loss, or some other cross in your marriage, you can pick it up together and you can walk with Jesus. Understanding the theology doesn't make abstinence or any of those crosses any easier to carry, but it makes them make sense, and it helps us grow closer to God, and it helps us run toward heaven with our spouse. Thank you so much for being here. If you aren't already following us on Instagram, find us at Charting Toward Intimacy. Check out the show notes for other ways to reach out. You can support this podcast on Patreon, patreon.com/charting. Until next time.